Hey, what's up guys, my name is Fox and welcome to another video of mine. In this video, I'm going to introduce you to the most popular engravings and talk a bit about them. If you are completely new to engravings and need more guidance on what they are, I really suggest you to first watch my complete engravings guide to understand the foundation of engravings in Lost Ark. You can find the video in the description or in the top right corner. Now, before we start with this list of engravings, I want to explain my criteria for this list and where I got the information from. I basically went to Lava and checked the most used engravings in the top 200 for every class, and then used those stats to determine the most commonly used engravings for classes that will be available on a UNA release. Now, we have to keep in mind that certain engravings were just buffed recently, like for example the Madness engraving for the Berserker, but swapping a full 5 engraving setup at endgame is very costly and also requires you to find the perfect pieces. So it is to be noted that not everyone would or will swap to a different setup because of the sheer amount of cost of in-game materials and gold required to make it happen. Some numbers are to be taken with a grain of salt, and on top of that, just like in Russia, there are artifact sets that enhance certain playstyles. For example, the Absolute Power set relying on you using your Awakening every 2 minutes to keep up its buff, which therefore also requires you to run the Awakening engraving. But I will mention these things every time we come across a specific case. Lastly, I want to mention that I will also talk about engravings regarding tier 1 and how strong they are in my opinion. Please note, this video is only going to cover DPS engravings and not engravings used either by the Bard or the Paladin. But without further ado, let's jump into it. First, I'm going to cover the all-arounders, engravings that are generally used by many classes and that can also always be ran without meeting certain conditions necessarily. So, here it is. The absolutely most commonly ran engraving in the whole game is, to no one's surprise, the Grudge engraving. It is ran by all 13 classes and on average ran by 98% of the players of all those classes. This obviously does not come as a surprise to us because it is the most powerful engraving you can find in the game. It simply increases your damage done to bosses by 20%, but also increases your damage taken by 20% from those bosses. Grudge is also an engraving that I really recommend to be running it in tier 1. The next absolutely amazing engraving on this list is Cursed Doll. Cursed Doll is a flat 16% attack power increase, while it does reduce your healing from consumables. I have found Cursed Doll to be used by 12 classes out of the 13 on launch, and 70% of the players of those classes are actively using it. Cursed Doll simply has no requirements, just like Grudge, and flat out increases your damage without meeting any conditions. Obviously, the downside to it is that you do not heal for as much as you usually would. For tier 1, Cursed Doll is a solid option if there is nothing else that your class specifically prefers. Next up on this list is Sharp Blunt. Now, before I talk about Sharp Blunt, I have to explain how it works properly. Sharp Blunt increases your critical damage by 50%, so instead of doing 200% critical strike damage, you do 250% damage. Yet it also has a chance of reducing your damage by 20%. At 100% critical strike chance, Sharp Blunt is a massive 22.5% damage increase, making it stronger than Grudge and Cursed Doll. Please keep in mind though, in order to make Sharp Blunt good, you need to run it at level 3, which is very important, and you also need to have around at least 55% critical strike chance. While in Korea in tier 3 this is very easy, for us in tier 1 in a UNA, you should probably completely disregard Sharp Blunt, unless you are somehow able to reach that sweet spot of 55% critical strike chance for some reason. But in general, once we reach tier 3, Sharp Blunt becomes an absolute amazing engraving that is stronger than most other engravings that you can find in the game, especially when playing classes with high critical strike chance. Lastly on my list of all-arounders is one of my personal favorites, the Adrenaline engraving. Adrenaline is an engraving that gives you stacks for every ability that you use, and those stacks increase your attack power by 1% per stack up to a maximum of 6. At 6 stacks, you then get an additional 15% critical strike chance. This engraving is pretty good, especially for classes that have a low critical strike chance. A small downside is obviously that you need to be able to keep up the stacks, so classes with high cooldowns do not enjoy this engraving as much as spammy classes. Adrenaline is also an engraving that is very commonly ran at level 1 as the last additional slot because it is so efficient and has no downside to running it at level 1, unlike for example Grudge or Cursed Stall. In tier 1, Adrenaline will be very strong because we are unable to hit high critical strike chance numbers. For that reason, I really suggest looking into running Adrenaline in tier 1. Now let's move on to engravings that are very good, but rather situational, depending on the classes you play. The engravings in the oncoming list cannot be ran by all classes, but are very powerful on classes that benefit them. So let's have a look. First up is Backstabbing Master. It is obviously only ran on classes that do have bag attacks. For those classes, it is extremely strong as it is a 25% damage increase if your bag attack also is hitting from the back as it should. Classes that do enjoy this engraving would be, for example, the Scrapper, Deadeye, Striker, and the Deathblade. Next up is Blitz Commander, an engraving that can be extremely strong for classes that run agility or have inbuilt movement speed tools. It increases the damage of your class by 45% of the additional movement speed bonus that you have. Notable classes that choose to run Blitz Commander would be the Shadow Hunter, the War Dancer, and the Berserker. Another really good engraving that you can opt for is the Massacre engraving, which simply increases the damage of non-positional skills by a whopping 16%, just like Cursed Stall for example. Very strong on classes that do not rely on positionals. You will find this most commonly ran by the Sorcerers, Gunslingers, Sharpshooters, and Artillerists. There are a few more engravings that could be put in this list, but they are so specific that I don't feel like I should include them in a video that should be covering engravings ran by multiple classes. So instead, I'll now do a short summary for the 13 DPS classes that will be available on release with my suggestions for tier 1. I will be putting the sheets that you will see now also in the descriptions as pictures so you can look at them while you are playing your character or when choosing what engravings to run. Obviously, there are many more engravings in the game than the ones I presented to you on the list or on the pictures afterwards. What about all of those other engravings? Well, to put it frankly, most of them are pretty useless. Some of them have uses, but they're very specific. Take for example Gladiator, which is an engraving you can run in Chaos Dungeons to speed up your Chaos Dungeon clear. Some engravings are also useful for PvP content, and other engravings simply are QL engravings like Heavy Armor or Spirit Absorption that do not necessarily increase your damage, but they increase your ability to take more damage or rather soak more damage, or to increase your movement speed and casting speed. While these kind of engravings don't necessarily contribute to your damage done, they might contribute to you staying alive longer or just enjoying the game more. Whatever you decide to run in the end is obviously up to you. I merely presented to you the most common and probably also most optimal engraving combinations that you can find. With that said, we're at the end of this video. I hope you guys learned something today and you obviously enjoyed this video. If you did so, make sure to hit that like button, and if you really liked it, you can also subscribe to my YouTube channel. I will be making obviously more videos and trying to cover more content until release. I also do stream regularly at least 3 times a week on my Twitch channel, where you can leave me a follow, and you can also follow me on Twitter, where I always post new videos or whenever I go live on Twitch. Lastly, you can also join my Discord, which is the community behind my YouTube channel and my stream, and also a hub for our guild that will be an EU guild for Lost Ark. On that note, I'm wishing you a great rest of your day wherever you live.